We have a few very early bold predictions for the New York Giants 2022 season. What are they? I'm going to tell you about them next on the LockedOn Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the LockedOn Giants podcast, part of the LockedOn Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina, and welcome to our Wednesday edition of the LockedOn Giants podcast. We are doing a summer schedule. We're on a summer schedule. We're now through next month, since we're kind of in the quiet period of the NFL calendar. But we're still coming at you at least 3 times a week. And thank you, as always, for making the LockedOn Giants podcast your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. Today's episode of the LockedOn Giants podcast is brought to you in part by Blue Nile. Make your moments sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com. And LockedOn Sports listeners get $50 off purchases of $500 or more with the code LockedOn. So check them out. And on today's LockedOn Giants podcast, I have for you 3 bold predictions that I think have a realistic chance of happening for the New York Giants in 2022. And I tried to think outside of the box on these 3. So these aren't ones that you're necessarily going to find over on Giants Country, where we just posted an article yesterday on 5 bold predictions. These are 3 different ones. And we're going to go through them, and I'm going to give you my reasoning why I think they have a chance of happening. And as always, feel free to drop a comment if watching on YouTube, or drop me an email if you're listening on any of our audio platforms. Love to hear from you guys and gals. So let's get right into it. All right. Bold prediction number 1. This is a big one, folks. I predict the Giants' injury problem, which has just been out of control the last several years, is going to be kept more intact, more in check this year. Now, I can't sit here and tell you that the Giants are going to be at the bottom 5 of the most of the least injured teams, I should say. I can't give you a placement, but I just have a gut feeling that the Giants are not going to be dealing with a placement in the top 5 injury-wide, league-wide. All right. Now, what is driving that opinion? Why do I feel that the Giants are going to have fewer injuries than in the past, considering concerns about the turf, considering concerns about how violent the game is? Why do I feel that way? Well, based on what I've seen in the spring. All right, so let's talk about that. Number 1, Giants head coach Brian Daboll, thus far throughout the spring, has let the conditioning take care of itself. And by that, I mean, as opposed to having guys run post-practice sprints and doing all the little extra calisthenics and stuff like that, Daboll's approach to conditioning has pretty much been the players are going to get their conditioning as they're running around out there on the field doing what they need to do. All right. So why run these guys down to a nub? Now, I have often wondered, and I have no proof of this whatsoever, but I have often wondered if perhaps the extra conditioning that the Giants were asked to do under Joe Judge maybe wore these guys out a little bit more. Maybe, between that extra conditioning and then going in to lift weights, and then not really having, especially during training camp, not really having, enough time. I think they had maybe 24 hours in between, if that much, to kind of, recover. I wondered if that took a toll on the players. I have no proof of that. This is just my theory. But I do know that if you're doing a lot of, calisthenics and aerobic exercise, to add conditioning on top of that might be overkill. And I go back to, I always go back to this conversation I had with a player years ago, a guy who historically was injured a lot. And then suddenly he figured out that as he got older, he didn't need to do all the extra conditioning and stuff that he was doing, that it was just making his body weaker and more susceptible to injuries. So he cut out some of the extra conditioning and workouts he was doing. And lo and behold, he didn't have injury issues. So that's the first thing that gives me hope that the Giants will not have as many, soft tissue injuries or issues as they have had in the past. The second thing under that category is that Dable has allowed guys that are injured wearing the red medical jerseys to do what they can. It hasn't been an all or nothing thing. So, for example, let's take Kenny Golladay. Now, Kenny Golladay, I don't know what his issue was this spring, but in the past, there would be an inclination to keep him sidelined out of concern of him, pulling the hamstring again or making it worse. With any injury, there is always a potential of a guy who's working it to make it worse. But they've been better with that. They've been more controlled, more on top of it. And they have told these guys during the spring, do what you can, do what the trainers approve you to do, as opposed to just having them sit by idly and not doing anything at all. Now, why is this important? Because it allows them, again, to keep up their conditioning, allows them to stay active. And it's not like, okay, in 2 weeks or whatever, now you got the green light to go back and go full speed. And now you're going to go from 0 to 100. No, you drop them down from maybe 100 to 50, and then you gradually ramp them up from 50 to 60 to 70 and so forth till you get to 100. But they have been smart about it with getting guys who were injured working. And I'll give you one example. Aaron Robinson was in a red jersey. Again, I don't know why. They never said why he was in a red jersey. They didn't have to say why because, this time of year, they don't need to tell you why a player is missing time. But as opposed to keeping Aaron Robinson on the side for all the team drills, Robinson was doing limited snaps in the spring. All right. So basically, they were kind of almost treating it like a practice, if you will, where these guys were limited. So if you were giving them, in-season injury designations, you would say Robinson was limited. You would say, maybe Kadarius Toney did not practice, and so on and so forth. But I like the approach. It was more of an in-season approach as opposed to let's just play it totally overly cautious and hope that nothing else pops up. So that's another thing, just keeping these guys in the mix, keeping them moving and active, and letting them do what they are capable of doing physically. All right, I'll give you one more thing in this category, the return of the post-practice cool-down sessions. Now this, they kind of got away from the days of bands. Remember when Tom Coughlin was the head coach and towards the end they used bands. They used to scream out bands and the players would sit down and they would stretch using resistance bands. Well, they got away from that with the last couple of coaching staffs. That has kind of come back. Not so much the bands have come back, but the post-practice cool down. Now, every trainer that I have ever spoken to say that when you have been running around and you have your heart rate elevated, the thing you want to do is you want to bring your heart rate back down to normal, and then you want to stretch after your workout to release any, acids or whatnot that built up in the muscle from running around. Because that's when your muscles and your joints and ligaments are going to be at their most flexible. So you want to stretch them, release any, of those toxins, if you will, so that the body can pass them. And that aids in recovery. So that has come back with Brian Dable. He does have them do post-practice stretch. And then they go inside to the facility. And I don't know if they're lifting weights or what they're doing exactly, but, it's an extra step that they got away from. And it helps with guys tightening up. And we'll see if this all leads to a reduction in injuries. But these are the three elements that have me thinking that hopefully, fingers crossed, the Giants will not be as injured as they have been in recent years. All right. What else do I have on my list of bold predictions? I have 3 of them. I'll tell you. Number 2 on my list coming up next. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's LockedOn Giants podcast. But first, if you're looking for that special gift, but can't decide, or maybe you're just ready to pop the question to that special someone, BlueNile.com has you covered either way. BlueNile.com has jewelry experts on hand 24/7 via phone or chat to help you find a gift within your budget range. Or if you're feeling creative, use BlueNile.com's online tools to create the perfect one-of-a-kind diamond ring. Whatever your occasion, make your moments sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com. Locked On Sports listeners get $50 off purchases of $500 or more with the code Locked On. So go ahead and put your faith in Blue Nile and know that every order is insured, ships free, and comes in discreet packaging that won't give away the contents. Go to BlueNile.com today and find your forever piece. Remember that promo code is Locked On for $50 off your purchase of $500 or more. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I am Patricia Traina. We are on a summer schedule with the Locked On Giants podcast. So we're coming to you Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And just as a reminder, if I get enough questions between the time the show airs and tonight, when I sit down to usually record the show, I'll do a Twitter Thursday. Right now, I think I have only 2 questions, so not enough to do a Twitter Thursday. If I get some more questions in, then I'll make that Friday's show. If I don't, then I'll do another topic for Friday. But I do want to mention that because I know some of you do send me in questions, and I got to have enough to run a show. I can't just have like 1 or 2 questions. I have to have at least 5 in order to do a show. And the more the merrier, quite honestly. All right, before we get back to my list of the 3 bold predictions for the Giants in 2022, just want to tell you that the Ultimate NBA mock draft starts June 16th. And with over 50 insiders, nothing equals the Ultimate NBA mock draft. The Locked On NBA Big Board draft experts plus the Odyssey insiders. The first pick will be made June 16th. So go ahead, search the Ultimate NBA mock draft and follow now so you don't miss a pick. All right, going to be exciting. The NBA has their draft coming up. And I know that's an exciting time for the NBA sports world. Just as the NFL draft is always exciting for us here over on the Locked On Giants podcast. All right, let's get back to my list of 3 bold predictions for the New York Giants in 2022. Item number 2. All right, you might want to be sitting down for this before I tell you. You're sitting down? Good. A better offensive line. Okay, you're saying, what? Why? Why should I believe that this line is going to be better? Especially after we were promised a better offensive line last year and the year before that and the year before that and the year before that. And you get the idea. Why do I have more confidence that this year's offensive line is going to be better than what we have seen in the past? I'm going to give you a few reasons. All right. Number 1, the approach that the Giants are using to build the offensive line is different than what they used or tried to use last year. And that is they're going primarily with youth on the at the tackle spot. You know, Andrew Thomas is going into his 3rd year. Evan Neal is a rookie. And then along the interior, they're primarily going with veterans. All right. The one exception you can make a case for is Shane Lemieux, who, even though I think he's going into his 3rd season after missing last year, you know, with the knee injury, they have a veteran center, John Feliciano, and Mark Lewinsky at right guard. All right. Now, why is that different? Because last year, meaning 2021, the plan was to let all the young kids play and grow old together. And the backup plan was to have veterans come in if somebody got hurt or if somebody didn't perform well. And what that did was that that drained the Giants, if you will, of developmental talent. They didn't really have any talent in the cupboard to develop. So if somebody got hurt on the starting line or somebody retired or whatever, they had nobody. So they were forced to stick with guys that maybe should have been benched, you know, and never were. The Giants are going about it differently. In addition to how they're building the offensive line, the depth, they've got young guys that they're going to develop, that they're going to try and get ready for ultimately starting roles when these guys in front of them move on for whatever the reason. So the Giants are going back to basics with rebuilding that offensive line. You know, we talk about the tight end room and how the Giants started from scratch with that unit. They pretty much started from scratch with the offensive line. Yes, there are some holdovers, with Andrew Thomas, Shane Lemieux, with Nick Gates, who may or may not be ready, with Matt Parrott, who may or may not be ready, and a few other guys. But they're just going about it the smart way, which is mix it up with youth and veteran experience, let them grow together, let them, get off on the right foot, build up some confidence, and then start to maybe bring in some of these younger guys who are the long-term future and let them play for some of these veterans who maybe are going to be in the future moving forward. So it's kind of a smart approach, I think. Now, I will say this much, and you're probably, hard to argue with this. You cannot tell for sure how good an offensive line is going to be in the spring because there's no pads, there's no contact. But there is something this spring that the Giants offensive line has had that they didn't have last spring or last summer or sometimes during the season. Matter of fact, I don't think you could say they had it throughout the first two seasons or the 2 seasons of Joe Judge's regime. Based on the practices that I've seen this spring, and granted, I've only seen a handful of them. I've seen 3 OTAs to 2 mandatory mini camp practices, and then 1 voluntary mini camp practice back in April. But I can tell you, for the most part, the offensive line has been consistent, with the exception, obviously, at left tackle, with Andrew Thomas still recovering from his ankle injury. Now, what I mean by that is there hasn't been a lot in the way of rotation on that first team offensive line. You've seen units kind of build that cohesiveness or try to build that cohesiveness and that chemistry. That was something we really didn't see a whole lot of last year under Joe Judge, or really the year before, which, the year before you can make the case that COVID wiped out the spring practices and they had to kind of figure out what they had and, put together lineups. But when you have a coach that goes with that rotation, that offensive line rotation, that's really the one unit where you don't want to go and have a lot of change up. You want to be able to have an offensive line that gets together, that builds that cohesiveness, that learns how to communicate both verbally and non-verbally, and just comes together as one, because it's basically going to be one big choreographed routine, if you will. And that's something that I think the Giants were working towards this spring, putting the 5 best guys together. Again, Andrew Thomas not able to practice because of the ankle surgery that he had in the offseason that he's recovering from, but he will be a part of that mix. And, the offensive line, I think we can honestly say going into training camp, unless something totally out of the ordinary were to happen, you can probably say that the starting offensive line that the Giants coaching staff is maybe looking to have would consist of Thomas, Shane Lemieux at left guard, John Feliciano at center, Mark Lewinsky at right guard, and Evan Neal at right tackle. That's not a bad lineup, guys. All right. Now, obviously, they've got to put the pads on. We've got to see how they look going up against the defensive line or the defensive front. We've got to see them, in contact drills. So there's still a lot to be seen. But from a fundamental perspective and from the intangible perspective, having these guys work together and having the coaching staff kind of know who their 5 guys are going to be, big advantage. And a big reason why I think the Giants offensive line is going to be better than what we have seen the last couple of years. All right, Giant fans, I have one more thing that I want to talk about. One more bold prediction that is kind of out there, but, has a good chance of happening. I'm going to tell you what that is right after this. All right, Giant fans, more coming up on today's LockedOn Giants podcast. But first, Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, but without the calories and without the sugar. Most Built Bars contain about 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein, and they taste great. And you know what? Right now, I'm really into Built Bars, Built Puffs, which are like a marshmallow type treat covered in real milk chocolate, made with collagen protein powder. Really good stuff. Right now, they have a flavor called mud pie that is just one of the best flavors that I have tasted in quite some time. And that's saying a lot, considering that I've liked a lot of their flavors that have come out on the Built Puff line. So check them out, builtbar.com. They have flavors available in nut and nut-free variety. They rotate their flavors. And right now, when you use our special promo code LOCKED15, you will save 15% off of your first order at built.com. Again, that promo code is LOCKED15, LOCKED15 for 15% off your first order at built.com. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the LockedOn Giants podcast. I am Patricia Traina, your host, longtime Giants beat writer. I'm going on, gosh, what is it, 31, 32? It's over 30 years I've been covering this team. Hard to believe, right? Because I know a lot of you think I'm only like 28 years old, 29 years old. Not really. I won't tell you how old I am, but I'll let you do the math. Anyways, still enjoying it, still having a great time. Love coming to you guys, on your radios or however you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just love talking Giants football with y'all. And again, reminder, if you get your questions into me, I'll do something, I'll do a Twitter mailbag for you for Thursday. If we don't get enough questions, then, I'll just wait till I have enough and then I'll do a mailbag for you on the podcast. But otherwise, we'll just do shows here in the summer schedule, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and as needed. If we need to do additional shows, of course, I will be online with additional shows and news breaking items for you so that you don't fall too far behind in your Giants coverage. So thank you again for listening. We're talking about bold predictions. And if you read me, well, actually, I didn't write it on Giants Country, but if you read Giants Country, Brandon Olson wrote 5 bold predictions about the Giants for 2022. And I said, you know what? That's a good idea for a show. So I came up with a list of 3. And I really wanted to think outside of the box. I didn't want to go necessarily with statistics or anything like that. I wanted to address bigger questions, bigger challenges, bigger problems, if you will. And in the first segment, I talked about, how I think there are going to be fewer injuries this year. I talked about in the last segment about why I think the offensive line is going to finally come around and be better than it's been in the past. And this one, I'm going to close out with a prediction. And the prediction is, after being shut out last year in the Pro Bowl, I think the Giants are going to have 2 guys that make the Pro Bowl this year. Now, before I tell you who those 2 are, for what it's worth, the Pro Bowl is a popularity contest. I get it. The Pro Bowl, the game itself, is a joke. I get it. I want to see it go away just as much as a lot of people do, because I just think it's just, why bother? But it's still a postseason honor, and it is still technically an all-star game. And, you like to think that the players and the coaches who also vote for Pro Bowl selections know what they're talking about. The fans too. The fans know what they're talking about, but the players and the coaches make up 2/3 of the voting. So you'd like to think that the guys that get selected for Pro Bowls are legitimately the cream of the crop. Now, obviously, with the game and whatnot, it kind of waters it down, because then you're going down to the first alternate, the second alternate, and so on and so forth. Get rid of all that. Just name your Pro Bowl rosters and be done with it. So anyway, I have 2 guys that I think from the Giants can be Pro Bowl players, one on offense and one on defense. On offense, I'm going to roll with Andrew Thomas, the left tackle. Now, you go back to Andrew Thomas's first season, his rookie season, when he just wasn't very good. And I chalk that up to the change in the instability of coaching. I chalk that up to an ankle ailment that he had, and just, coming out of school and just trying to navigate through choppy waters. It was a challenge for Andrew. Now, in his second season, he played a lot better. All right. Even though he still had the injury issue, even though maybe the talent around him wasn't as, consistent or as solid as you'd like it to be. So Andrew did play better in his second season. Matter of fact, I think we could all agree that he was probably the best offensive lineman of the starters last year. So I just think if they have finally fixed Andrew's ankle ailment, which has been bothering him now for 2 seasons, if they finally fix that, between the offensive scheme that they're putting in place, in which these guys aren't really going to have to hold blocks as much as, as long as they've had to in the past, in which they've had more talent or better talent around him, more creative schemes, and more of an emphasis on NFL fundamentals with Bobby Johnson, who's really been drilling those guys all spring, really paying attention to the little details. You'd like to think that Andrew Thomas is going to take an even bigger step forward. And in the nick of time, folks, because after this season, the Giants are going to have to make a decision on whether or not to exercise his rookie year option. Right now, I think it's a slam dunk. I don't see how they don't exercise it. I mean, unless, God forbid, he suffers a season-ending or career-altering injury. But I think Andrew Thomas, all things considered, has worked out pretty well for the Giants. All right. And I know there was a time when people were saying, oh, my God, he's not as good as Jedrick Wills or Mekhi Becton or, Tristan Wirfs. And, some people might feel he's still not as good as those guys. But for the Giants, he's been solid. And I could see that guy making the Pro Bowl next year, or after this season, I should say. Now, on defense, choice is pretty obvious to me. No, it is not Leonard Williams. No, it is not one of the edge rushers. I'm going to go with safety Xavier McKinney. This is another guy who got off to a rocky start in his NFL career. He, of course, broke his foot towards the end of his rookie season, or I should say towards the end of training camp in his rookie season. He missed more than half of his rookie campaign, came back, showed flashes, and you thought, okay, somebody to keep an eye on. Well, last year, played very well, led the team in interceptions, got more and more confident, grew into the role. And now with Logan Ryan no longer on the team and Jabril Peppers no longer on the team, guess who the leader of that defensive secondary is? Yeah, it's Xavier McKinney. And he has really taken advantage of that leadership role. He has blossomed into a guy who is more vocal out on the field. He is looking more and more confident every day, even though this is a new system. You can just see him flying around, having fun. This is a guy who I think is going to have a big season for the Giants. And they need him to, I think he's going to deliver on that. I think he's going to, lead the team again in interceptions. I could certainly see that being the case. I could see him, being up there, if not leading the team in tackles. McKinney is so versatile that no matter what role I think defensive coordinator Wink Martindale puts him in, he's going to excel. And the more a guy can do, the more exciting he is to watch. And the more he can contribute in a positive way, well, that just is another feather in his cap. So I am looking forward to seeing how Xavier McKinney functions in this defense. Based on what I saw in the spring, very, very encouraged. And if you were to ask me to vote on the Pro Bowl players right now, Thomas and McKinney, hands down, are my two choices. And they, by the way, would be the first Pro Bowlers for the Giants on offense and defense since 2020, when Evan Ingram and James Bradbury were selected by their peers and by the fans for the Pro Bowl. So bottom line, folks, I don't think there's going to be a shutout of the Giants on the Pro Bowl honors, which again, I know doesn't mean anything. The bigger one is the All-Pro honors. But look, it's a start for a team that has nowhere to go but up. It is a start. And I, for one, am looking forward to it. Training camp will be here before we know it. We'll have the daily reports before we know it. So much to talk about, and a lot to talk about actually before we get to that point. So make sure you keep it here all summer long on the LockedOn Giants podcast. I want to thank you for tuning in. That's going to do it for us for today's show. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. We do appreciate it. And I just want to remind you, now that you listen to the LockedOn Giants podcast, make your second listen the LockedOn NFL podcast. That's our national podcast featuring NFL experts and insiders that keep fans dialed in with the biggest stories and the latest news from around the league, because offseason doesn't equal a break in the action. And right now, there's a lot of teams around the league that are holding mini camps. They're going through this week. Whereas the Giants are done. So you want to tune in and get all the latest news around the league, hit up the LockedOn NFL podcast. Follow it every day on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Giant fans, that'll do it for me. Until next time, have a great one.